the Ukrainians were able to not simply cut that rail line, those rail lines going into Crimea, but actually advance to the coast so that Crimea becomes basically a death camp run by Russians where Russians are dying and starving. Because remember, the Russians destroyed the Kakhovka Dam. There's no more irrigation for agriculture in Crimea at all. So all the food is imported. If you turn that into a very public, globally aware place where the Russians are dying in the streets because they can't get food in, I can't comment about Avdiivka or Bakhmut. Those numbers are just too squirrely. I don't want to say that they're wrong. I think they're in the right realm. As for the 500,000 number, I think that's absolutely accurate. Keep in mind, the Russians have 8 million men in their 20s, or at least that's what they started the war with. If they've lost 500,000 now, and 1 million have fled, that still leaves them with 6.5 million bodies to throw at this problem. And to be perfectly blunt, the Russians have yet to fully mobilize. Most of the people that they've brought in through their draft system have been minorities from ethnically disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged areas. They haven't really gotten into the core of what the country is capable of. That's still ahead of us. But at this rate, there's no way the Russians can keep this up for another 8 years. And I know that sounds like a long time. It is. But remember two things. Number one, the Russians never fight short wars. They do short intimidations. Their wars are always long because they're always about human waves. Number two, if they do this, this is their last war, because there aren't enough Russians under age 20 to theoretically repopulate the system. So when this is done one way or another, Russia is done. Like I said, everyone who thought they understood how this was going to go has been wrong repeatedly. This is the most dynamic military conflict we have seen in the world since at least the Crimean conflict in the 1800s, because we're dealing with a technological evolution here that is playing against a massive legacy. So you've got the Soviet legacy, which is the largest armament supply system in the world, and more importantly, the largest armament reserve in the world. That's a lot of hardware to chew through and a lot of inertia when it comes to innovation. On the other side, you've got the information technology revolution that has now, the second generation of it is being married to military affairs, and that's where all the drones are coming from. So we've got a technological revolution happening in very real time with a lot of outside support on both sides in pushing that technological frontier forward. At the same time, there's just this sheer mass of material that has to be blown up. I don't know how this is going to go, and people are coming up with new tactics every few weeks. I don't want to rule that out, but I would caution you to consider that people thought the same thing about hypersonics. The problem with single-point attack systems is they don't hold territory. They destroy infrastructure, they destroy vehicles, and that's obviously part of war. But that doesn't allow you to win or, more importantly, hold the terrain. The question here is, what are the rules of the old system that still apply? And when I say the old system, I'm not talking industrialization. I'm talking like spears and arrows, physically holding territory, versus what of the newer old system, industrialization, will hold, versus what will hold of the new system. And we figure that out as we go. I mean, there are very, very good reasons why the French, the Brits, and the Germans all sent observers to America's Civil War, because there were new things in play, and no one really understood how they fit together. We're all watching this with huge interest, and the implications for the next 40 years are immense. I would argue that it's been going on since the first year of the war. Now, whether these two specific generals are responsible for basically rounding people up, I don't have the evidence of that one way or the other. But remember that a few years ago, Sri Lanka suffered a massive economic dislocation, and people were desperate to get whatever they could get. And the Russians signed a series of deals that would allow Russians to be basically tourists in Sri Lanka. And that had established a bit of a back and forth in which people could move as well. So the idea that there's Sri Lankans fighting in Ukraine, that doesn't surprise me at all. There are Nigerians fighting in Ukraine. There are exchange students that the Russians have press ganged into fighting in Ukraine. So this is not a new strategy for the Russians. They did this extensively during the Cold War as well. So we have these weird press gang multinational brigades that the Russians don't advertise that they're using as cannon fodder right along their convicts. Every little bit helps, but to say one thing is going to be decisive when you've got a a land war on a front that's over 1,500 kilometers long, I think, is a bit of a stretch. Using the interest from the frozen Russian investments, though, honestly, that was a stroke of genius. I don't know who came up with that one, but I want to buy them a drink because it basically finds a nice little loophole in international law that only pisses off the Russians and nobody else. I mean, that was very well done. Whether $50 billion in one pop and what'll probably be around $10 to $15 billion a year moving on is enough to move the needle. I mean, it doesn't hurt. But, if Ukraine wins this, they're going to need $1 trillion. I'm not sure that support is available. And I don't think it's a question of will or red lines. The United States, when it fights a war, it fights with reach and precision over volume. And the Europeans, for the most part, have pretended until very recently that war was in the past, and so they allowed their military-industrial complexes to atrophy. We're now in a conflict that has more similarities with World War I than World War II or Vietnam or even much less the Desert Storm. And that means artillery, and that means building up the industrial plant that's necessary to build that artillery. And those processes are being developed, not just in the United States, especially in Europe, but it takes time. And $50 billion is really useful, but these things still aren't going to be providing the volume of artillery shells that the Ukrainians need this year or next year. I don't think, mixing domestic, European, and international politics always makes an interesting cocktail. But there's not a lot of light among the G7 on these topics. And the fact that it was the Canadians who were the first major country to talk about basically confiscating the profits of Russian investments, that really lowers the bar for everyone else. Because the Canadians are the ones who are basically, we don't really contribute too much here except for respect for rule of law. And look, we found a way to get around that respect. So everyone else was like, sweet. So that's done. And, any additional assistance is going to help with solidarity versus the Russians. But the issues that the Europeans are having for, say, the far right surge, they're going to have to deal with those in their own way. I'm really not worried about the French. Macron, by starting these new let me back up. The National Front did very well in European Union elections, and Macron immediately called snap elections for the parliament, which everyone was like, oh, he's going to lose everything. But now we've got a civil war going on among the French far right. So, Macron didn't get into his position by being a dumbass. This might work out really well for him if he can actually shatter the political hold and the aura of the far right. The Germans are a different situation. If you had new elections today in Germany, Schulz would absolutely lose. But because of the way their constitution works, the way we wrote their constitution, that's not a threat. He gets to serve out the remainder of the 3 years of his term. He's not going anywhere unless he chooses to leave. And that just leaves Italy, where it's the ruling party that won the EP elections. So all this gnashing of teeth we have in Europe about the EP, it's really not that big of a deal at this moment until you win in national elections and then prove that you're a little wackadoo. Everything's okay. The Italians have proven they're not wackadoo. The French are containing this. The Germans have 3 years left. They're fine. They need to see the Russians not just humbled but destroyed. Autocrats are by nature hierarchical systems without a lot of support on the sides. And they are going to cherry pick whatever information they see, not just for their propaganda, but for their own internal processing. And it takes a really, really sharp hit to break through that layer of conscious distorting of reality within your own mind. And so a battlefield defeat for the Russians isn't going to change anyone's mind. But if you break the Russian system, that
Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I am back with another brand new video. In this video, see famous geopolitical strategies analyzer Peter Zeihan has discussed about ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. In this video, he has covered and
Help!
why Russia's military strategy might doom in the future. He has discussed about Russia, Ukraine war and Russian war strategy. So guys, if you are like to watch videos who is discussed by Scott Creator Zeihan, then you can subscribe my channel and you can watch each of my videos on my channel. And I hope this video will liked by you and you will enjoy this video. So without wasting your time, let's watch the video until the end. Peter Zeihan is an ex-presidential narrator of current situation, including economic and political and economical. He covers all this topic in his interview. So please check the full video until the end and share your thinking on video. Is it Peter Zeihan right or not? Okay. Thank you guys who are still watching. Now I am going to end this video from here because this is too enough long for me. I'll be back with another video.
Marked a location.
Bye for now. I hope all will be okay. Thank you guys for watching until the end. Love you. Have a nice